7th, 2018 Commission meeting. I don't have any opening statements. Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
With the agenda.
Will do. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner. You have 4 items on your agenda this morning, 2 in open and 2 in closed session. Before we begin, just a note that we'll take a 10-minute break between the open and closed sessions today. The first item this morning is a briefing by Commissioner Dye on her final report and fact-finding number 28.
Thank you. Good morning. The first thing I want to say is I can't believe that I missed the Christmas party yesterday. But I hear it was great, and I know you all carried on. The fact-finding 28 final report following Commission acceptance of the recommendations will be posted later on our website. At the hearing on the demurrage and detention petition by the Coalition for Fair Port Practices, I stated that my approach is how demurrage and detention approaches can optimize, not diminish, the performance of the overall American international freight delivery system. I continue to believe that we can all agree that demurrage and detention processes should support prompt, efficient cargo delivery. Improvements in those processes may require closer coordination and obviously visibility among ocean carriers, marine terminals, intermediaries, truckers, shippers, and chassis providers. My findings in this investigation emphasize the value of demurrage and detention charges when applied in ways that incentivize all cargo interests to move cargo promptly from ports and marine terminals. I also find that all international supply chain actors benefit from transparent, consistent, and reasonable demurrage and detention practices to improve throughput velocity at U.S. ports, allow for more efficient use of business assets, and result in administrative savings. Finally, most important, focusing ocean carrier, port, and marine terminal operations on notice of actual cargo availability would achieve the goals of demurrage and detention practices and improve the performance of the international supply chain. This concept of actual cargo availability comes from the FMC Innovation Teams project, where shippers told us that all I want to know is when I can get it. When I first discussed this approach with one of our major trucker representatives, he said, "Commissioner, that would fix everything." Now, when you say something like that to an old legislative attorney, that sets you on fire. Of course, it's more complex than that. But if we can refine this approach and get buy-in from all cargo interests, there should be no need, for example, for shippers to negotiate additional storage time on the terminal. And so I recommend that we continue this process with organized FMC innovation teams composed of industry leaders who will meet here on a limited, short-term basis to refine commercially viable demurrage and detention processes in the 4 areas we discussed in the fact-finding 28 interim report. Standardized detention and demurrage language, clear and accessible billing practices and dispute resolution practices for demurrage and detention. Within those discussions, we'll also provide an opportunity to discuss the optional billing model for carriers and terminals to charge directly for use of their assets. 3, explicit evidence to aid in resolution of demurrage and detention disputes, and consistent notice to cargo interests of actual container availability. I also recommend that the FMC Institute and FMC Shipper Advisory Board, and also, if possible, for other FMC stakeholders. The success of the innovation team concept depends on having the right industry leaders at the table. I look for port directors who say things like, "Everybody's my customer," and those who suggest new ways to accomplish efficient port operations. They're an impressive group and have provided invaluable advice to me. I look for marine terminal operators who discuss pushing out information on cargo availability, like an airline notice to check in for a flight. Or who say to me, "If we can get this chassis thing fixed, Commissioner, I can do that." Or the major terminal CEO who was quoted in a press release stating that he intended to increase operational focus on beneficial cargo owners. Finally, you know who you are, this ocean carrier who began working with me on the very first day this investigation was announced. And also the many shippers and truckers and intermediaries who have already volunteered their time and their resources for this effort. Thank you. We'll call on these leaders again and encourage those of you who want to be involved going forward to be in touch with my office. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Commissioner Dye, thank you. First, I want to thank all of the many industry participants amongst all the stakeholders that did cooperate and engaged and helped you. I want to thank all of the FMC staff, not just Mr. Shakely and Mr. Graham here, but so many different members of the FMC staff that have worked on this. And last, but obviously far from least, is all the efforts. And I think you've moved up to flight statuses with number of miles logged on this. And
That's right.
And that kind of travel's not fun. It's hard work, and I appreciate it very much on behalf of all of the stakeholders and the commission. When we started with this, we understood it was a complicated issue. At some excess 300 and some odd terminals from, if you start at Maine and go all the way around the coast and up to Alaska and Hawaii, an awful lot of terminals with a lot of different practices. And that the more we got into it, the more we realized, you don't know what you don't know until you get there, and it was even more complicated.
It's true.
I mean, there's only one example I recall when I was first coming on board here in 2010, that Maersk was in the process of shedding its chassis operation, et cetera, and I kind of wondered at the time, well, how long will it take to come down with, what will it be, one business model like they have in Europe? Not likely, maybe 2 or 3 business models. I never would have guessed we'd be here in the end of 2018, and the chassis business is still trying to sort its way clear as to how is that industry going to work. I don't mean that in any way other than it's complicated, and it's taking a while to sort these various interests out. Clearly, this report is not the end, put it on a shelf, and it solves all things, but it is, I think, a very productive, very encouraging, very promising beginning. And again, I'll just stop and say thank you again for your work and ask if there are any motions at this point appropriate.
Yes, thank you very much. On behalf of my Fact-Finding 28 team, who are exceptional, I'd like to move that the commission accept the Fact-Finding 28 final report and approve the recommendations contained therein.
Any discussion on the motion?
No discussion.
Are you ready for the vote?
Well, I second the motion.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
too.
that-
Thank you.
it's,
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Dye?
Aye.
Chairman Corey?
aye.
Thank you. The ayes have it and the motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, our second item this morning is a proposed amendment to Part 515, Rules Governing Ocean Transportation Intermediary Licensing, and this item will be presented by Cliff Johnson of the Bureau of Certification and Licensing. Give us just a minute.
Good morning, Acting Chairman Corey and Commissioner Dye. The Bureau of Certification and Licensing is recommending several amendments to the regulations governing ocean transportation intermediary licensing, registration, and financial responsibility requirements. These recommended changes to the current rules are administrative or procedural in nature or will further reduce the regulatory burden on regulated entities. Because many of the changes are administrative or procedural, I'll try to be brief with my explanation. So A, updating 515 title and scope to include registrations is purely administrative. Registrations should have been included in the title and scope previously. B, Section 515.3 currently requires a registered foreign-based NVOCC to use licensed OTIs as an agent to provide NVOCC services in the United States. Stakeholders have asked for clarification as to whether such agents can be either ocean freight forwarders or NVOCCs. The proposed language clarifies that the licensed OTI agent can be either an ocean freight forwarder or an NVOCC. C, proposed changes to 515.5b and 515.12a would eliminate the paper application option for OTI licenses, based on the Commission's experience since introducing electronic filing. The Commission has not received any waiver requests to paper application since the waiver requirement was implemented in November of 2015. D, the qualifying individual requirements in 515.11b regarding partnerships assume that the managing partners are individuals and thus to be the QI for the partnership. In order to address the situation in which managing partners are entities rather than individuals, we have added clarifying language. E, adding the submission of Form FMC-1 prior to being licensed. The proposed change would require NVOCCs applying for a license to provide the Commission with a Form FMC-1 prior to the Commission issuing a license, which conforms to the current procedures for foreign-based NVOCCs registered with the Commission. Currently, a license is issued after the approval by the Commission and receipt of financial responsibility, although NVOCCs are required under 520.3 to submit a Form FMC-1 prior to commencement of the Common Carrier Service. Like the current requirement for submitting proof of financial responsibility, the proposed change would require NVOCCs to submit Form FMC-1 within 120 days of the approval of their license application. This change would add no additional burden to the NVOCCs seeking licenses, as they are already required to provide the Commission with a Form FMC1. The proposed change merely affects the timing of the submission of the form. F, license renewal process. The Commission issued thousands of ocean freight forwarder and NVOCC licenses on May 1st, 1999, which would result in a significant number of renewals being due on the same date every 3 years. Under the proposed rule, the Commission would assign a renewal date in order to more evenly spread out the license renewals across the entire 3-year period and thereby facilitate the efficient and prompt processing of such renewals. The proposed rule would also change the deadline for completing the renewal process. Currently, 515.14 requires licensed OTIs to complete the renewal process no later than 60 days prior to the renewal date. The proposed rule would change the deadline to the renewal date itself. This change would reduce the burden on the licensed OTIs by allowing them additional time to complete the renewal process. G, application after revocation or denial. The proposed rule would expand the types of applications subject to the Direct Commission review to include applicants employing any of the same officers, managers, or managers as an OTI whose license was revoked or denied within the previous 3 years because the Commission determined that the OTI was not qualified to provide OTI services. The proposed rule would also add language to more clearly reflect that denial of an application under 515.18 is final and not subject to the expedited hearing procedures in 515.17, but would be eligible for reconsideration under 502.261. H, the proposed rule would clarify 515.20 that a change in a licensee's name includes adding or deleting a trade name relating to its OTI services. OTIs must seek prior approval from the Commission before making such changes. I, the proposed rule would clarify in 515.22 that OTIs or the surety company may submit proof of financial responsibility via email. In 515.26, the Commission may transmit notices of termination of financial instruments via email. Allowing transmission of this information by email reduces delays and the burdens on both the OTIs and the Commission. J, the proposed rule under 515.23C would require financial responsibility providers to include the organization number of registered foreign-based NVOCCs when notifying the Commission of claims against the NVOCC. This proposed language reflects the current practice. And finally, K, the proposed rule would delete 515.34, which references the availability of the Regulated Persons Index, the RPI, on the Commission website. The Commission has tentatively determined that because the RPI is available on the website and the Commission advertised that fact, this section is no longer helpful or necessary. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to attempt to answer them.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Dye?
Thank you. No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation and the work on this. As you say, it is administrative, but that doesn't mean because it's technical, it doesn't have some importance. And as we regulate over 6,000 OTIs that your department takes care of, I appreciate the work. I don't have any questions. It's been well prepared. I think, the written memorandums have fully explained the issues. And so I think we're...
In that case, is there a motion to approve the staff's recommendation for publication of the proposed rule?
And it is my motion to do so, to
Okay.
move forward with this recommendation.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
I think.
Are we ready for the vote? Excellent. Commissioner Dye?
Aye.
Chairman Corey?
Aye.
The ayes have it, and the motion carries. That concludes our open session this morning. Members of the public are now excused.